Today on BRStv, we have week 52 of the 52 weeks of reefing. Hey guys, my name is Ryan. Welcome to another week of the BRS160, where every week we do our best to help you guys, members of the reefing community, enjoy your tanks and find new ways to explore the hobby. We do that by following the setup and progression of this 160-gallon reef tank. This week we're going to talk about tank upgrades for a short bit, but finish with where the BRS160 is now that we've completed the entire year, what we learned this year, and what the future holds for the BRS160. Upgrading is a natural progression of any hobby, whether it be because you want something bigger, badder, a different type, fix mistakes of the past, want a stand or tank that looks nicer in your room, you moved, or you simply have outgrown your current tank. Today we're going to talk about some considerations including size, shape, what to do with old livestock, new livestock, rock, and sand. We spent an entire episode on selecting the right type of tank for you in week 2, so we don't want to spend a tremendous amount of time on this today. I am going to share my standard favorite tank sizes and why. The number one rule of thumb for me is a reef tank should not be taller than it is deep unless you have a very specific look or aquascape you're looking for. The way that water reflects light already gives the illusion that it's about a third less deep than it really is. Making the tank taller than it is deep makes that effect even more pronounced. Tanks like this are just a lot harder to aquascape as well. So that said, changing to a more effective shape can be considered an upgrade even if it isn't significantly larger than what you have now. Other than a nano or pico tank for my desk, I think the smallest tank I'd even consider is a 40-gallon breeder, which is just slightly deeper than it is tall, which makes for an awesome dimension for a reef tank. Because of that, the 40-gallon breeder is easily one of the most popular reef tank sizes out there. After that, I personally jump all the way up to a 120-gallon tank. There are a whole slew of different sized tanks between a 40-gallon breeder and a 120. However, they're all significantly taller than they are deep, and I'd rather go slightly smaller or larger and get the right dimensional proportions. If I had to select one in the middle, it would be a 75-gallon because it's only 3 inches taller than it is deep and 4 feet wide, which is reasonable for most people. If I had to recommend one tank size above all others for newer to intermediate reefers who are looking for some advice, it would be the 120. The 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot dimensions leaves room for an awesome, easy to build aquascape. The volume of water is large enough that it buffers mistakes common to newer intermediate reefers. And while the tank itself might cost more, the equipment isn't drastically different. The most expensive components like lighting might even be the exact same as some of the smaller tank sizes. End of the day, if the hobby is something you and your family enjoy, the 120 will also be drastically less expensive and less work than buying everything and setting up a smaller tank, and then later upgrading, which causes you to buy slightly larger everything, a lesson that every single experienced reefer has experienced at some point. That said, beyond the 120 is where most fairly advanced reefers end up if they're itching to upgrade. Within popular commercial brands, that leaves two options like a 180, which is the same height and depth as a 120, but 6 feet wide. The BRS160 is fairly similar, but just a few inches shorter, so we could safely make it a rimless tank without ridiculously thick glass. I've been personally really happy with this tank size. Going larger for the most part means a 210 or 220, which is pretty similar to a 180 except for 30 inches tall. Marineland goes one size larger with a 265, which is 7 feet by 2 feet and by 30 inches tall again. I think this is as big as you're going to get with a mass-produced commercial glass tank. One thing to keep in mind is if you're tempted by these 30-inch deep tanks, unless you have extremely long arms, you're probably only going to be able to reach the bottom of the tank right up front, and every bit of maintenance you're going to do past that is going to be done with tongs or some other tool, unless you leave access to reach in the back. It can be a giant pain in the butt. Once you're past that, you're talking custom. Now you can go custom for a few reasons. One, because you want to go super mega. Two, because you have a particular size you want to build, even if it's smaller, or simply because you want the tank to look as nice as what's in it. Fact is, a tank and stand itself is a piece of furniture in your home. Lots of reefers won't care because a sofa is just something to sit on, a stand is just something for the glass box to sit on. Others have spent a lot of time and effort looking for a certain look in their living environment, and an off-the-shelf tank or stand won't cut it. However, custom means hand-built just for you, and it's going to cost triple of what some of the off-the-shelf tanks can cost, and the same could be said of the stand, so be prepared. However, with that, you get whatever you want and it will match your home's decor. The only custom aquarium manufacturer I've ever used is Felix at ReefSavvy, and I've always been elated with the quality of work he produces, so I don't even have anyone else I would consider. Fact is, there's one tank in particular on the BRStv Facebook page that I drool over. It's 120 inch long or 10 feet by 30 inch wide and 30 inch high, 467 gallon reef tank. 3 sides low iron, ghost overflows, and a quadruple laminated 2.5 inch bottom at 30 inches tall and 30 inches deep. I know my arms won't be able to reach the back, but I just don't care. Same could be said of Chris at Benner's Woodworking or Sticks and Stones. Send him photos of your room or even fly him out and he'll build the perfect piece just for you in your home. Here's a photo of the BRS160 stand before he sent it to us. He also does all kinds of custom doors and other features designed to make reefing easier. I haven't got around to it yet, but he's going to design a custom equipment storage solution for our controller, which will clean up the back of the 160 and make it as attractive as the front. Okay, so let's assume you've picked the perfect size tank for your upgrade. What are you going to do with your current livestock? I think that all kind of depends on if this is going to be considered a tank upgrade or a tank reboot. If your tank is currently filled with all kinds of funky algae, aptasia, or other unwanted pests, it's time to make a decision. I think there's 3 basic paths. Just move it all over anyways because the pests don't bother you that much and you're likely to get them again anyways. Or move over everything but spend a pretty significant amount of time manually removing, dipping, and whatever you can to remove the pests and then add them to the new tank, which is probably the most realistic option, but still very unlikely that you're going to eliminate all the pests. But you'll likely set them back enough that you'll buy yourself some time or even make the issue long-term manageable with good maintenance. I will say with this approach, I'd strongly consider completely killing your rock with bleach or acid. While you can remove pests from corals fairly easy, removing them from the rock work is almost impossible. In fact, my best advice is buy entirely new, dead, dry rock months in advance of doing your tank upgrade, right at the planning stages, and start curing it in heated beds of saltwater. This is going to give your new tank upgrade the best chances for a relatively pest and algae-free start, and the rock will look more uniform rather than an odd mismatch of old and new rock. Third option is a complete reboot, and nothing from the old tank is going to make it over to the new tank. This might be because you're going to be extremely diligent about keeping the tank pest-free and willing to do all the quarantine steps required to do that, or have coral sources you can be almost completely sure don't have pests in their systems. Only coral suppliers I trust to be as close to free of any major pests as possible are those who run 100% propagated systems where wild corals don't even enter the building, and they have rigorous quarantine and inspection standards for adding new mother colonies. Even then, you're more or less trusting that their quarantine standards are as good or better than yours. If you select the right vendor, that can absolutely be true. Outside of that, there will always be a higher risk of contamination, and coral quarantine at home is a requirement if you want to be diligent about maintaining a pest-free system. A complete reboot might also be something that you might consider if you're going to take your time between taking one tank down and putting the next up. Having the time to do things right is pretty awesome. You can always set up a smaller temporary system to house your most prized fish and corals in the meantime. Last piece of this is sand. Whether or not to use used sand is a pretty hotly debated topic. Even though it's expensive, I'm going to go on record that I would personally never start a new tank with old sand because it's such a huge detritus and nutrient trap. However, somebody recently commented on one of our videos that that's just stupid because all sand is used, in fact, it's used for millions of years in the ocean before it's ever sold to us as new sand. So I guess I have to agree with that logic, and the only real debate is, can you properly clean the sand at home? The best way I've found is to coil a hose up in a bucket and pour your sand over it, and then let the water turn over the sand until it runs clean. Personally, I think I'd go quite a while past where it visually looks clean. So that's about all there is to upgrading a tank. I'll note that you can avoid all this by simply getting the size that you really want and fits your space the first time. You'd be a rarity, but you can save a fortune and a lot of your own personal time as well. Okay, on to where the BRS160 is today. It's been a little over a year since we first started this series and about 5 months since we mounted the first corals in the beginning of April or week 38. We started with pretty small frags, but in that time, most of the SPS corals have grown substantially, encrusted the rock around the bases, and in another 6 months, I think we'll have a tank full of average to medium-sized colonies. Coloration on a few took a hit when we had the 2-part overdose debacle a few weeks ago, but overall, everything looks pretty awesome. I'm going to close out week 52 with what we learned this year, what you can expect to see on the BRS160 in the future, and then finish with some close-ups of how everything in the tank is doing and why all of us here at BRS enjoy this hobby so much. So what did we learn? Well, I found what I think is my current dream lighting solution for an SPS tank like this. Between all of us here at BRS, we have a ton of experience with basically every lighting solution out there, and I think we all universally agree that the halide T5 hybrid is still the gold standard from a coral health and growth standpoint. However, no one wants to deal with the heat issues, bulb replacements, and they lack all the cool features LEDs have. So the halide T5 combo just isn't as popular as it once was, other than those that are just looking for plug-and-play results. T5s alone also produce awesome results associated with the super diffused even blink of light fluorescent bulbs and their optimized reflectors produce. However, the lack of shimmer is a deal breaker for most of us. That's why so many fairly hardcore reefers are implementing T5 LED hybrids, which really seems to be the ideal hybrid of all the different technologies. Fact is, LEDs alone are awesome for softy, LPS, and even mixed tanks, which are like 80 to 90% of the reef tanks out there. It's the high-density SPS tanks that really require the ultra-diffused, large, hard-to-shadow light sources. But open and honest, every single tank I've seen where T5s were added to supplement the LEDs saw an almost immediate improvement in health and growth. Even the Clown Harem tank, which is just a bunch of bubble tips, saw a remarkable difference almost overnight. So there may be some situations where I might go LED only, but they're getting fewer and further between. There are just too many advantages from the T5 blanket of light for me to ignore. So most of you know that this is a 2 Kessel AP700 and 4 5-foot T5 hybrid on the 160. I discussed with the team if we could do it all over again, how would we improve on this lighting solution? And the debate is mostly between going to a 6-bulb T5 and smaller LEDs like the Kessel 360s, Radion XR15, or AI Prime HD. And the only other way to improve this would be to add another AP700 so the sides of the tank were a bit brighter. And if you prefer, you could also replace the AP700 with the new Gen 4 Radion XR30s with the new HEI optics. I like the idea of going 6-bulb T5 and smaller LEDs mostly because it allows for zoning and better control of lighting, which the AP700 doesn't give you as much control over. However, end of the day, don't mess with success, and we've all been really happy with the AP700. So just because we added a third one. Keep in mind we're running them at 30%, so this is serious overkill and more of a dream setup than anything. Only other tweak I might play around with is the new diffusion lenses because they do make the shimmer more attractive. But first I want to test the impact on par, which is something I'm sure you'll see soon. So all that said, I think most of us are a little bit disappointed with the software that runs the AP700, lack of firmware releases and releases to new devices, but I'm personally willing to put up with that because I like the light itself so much. Now most reefers out there own LED modules and they're not going to break the bank by buying a T5 hybrid fixture as well. So I'd like to call on some manufacturer out there to make a low-cost T5 fixture that accepts all the common LED module sources we use, like the Radions, the AIs, and Kessels we already have, and realize the benefits of the hybrid solution without going broke. If you would buy an affordable hybrid solution like that, make sure to let the manufacturers know by commenting and giving those comments a quick thumbs up. In close relation to that, I think the series has kind of drilled home to me how valuable a par meter is as well. As this hobby has progressed, the lighting options themselves, as well as their almost insane amount of controls, has produced just what we were asking for, which was flexibility options. However, with that, very few of us picked up a tool to measure those optimizations. I think the current lowest cost option for that is a Senai. Since it isn't something that you use all the time, it's an awesome item to pick up with a friend, share with a reef club, and I think an awesome idea for a local fish store to rent. So what else did I learn in this series? Well, the mystery surrounding the KZ line was largely cleared up. This is just a carbon dosing solution which goes a bit beyond simple carbon dosing by prescribing some nutrients and elements which keep the corals healthy and colorful in this ultra-low nutrient environment. I think that this is absolutely something that you could achieve with other carbon dosing methods combined with other additives or foods, but the fact that this is a proven system with clearly outlined instructions has a lot of value, and also one that's absolutely working for me, which is enough for me to continue using it and recommend it to others. End of the day, we feed this tank a lot, probably more than I've ever fed a tank before. Water changes are a measly, super easy to perform 10%, and we have consistently at or near zero nitrate and phosphate. For a tank that has proportionally very few corals in it because of their size at introduction, that is a rarity. Carbon dosing in general is something I think I might do in every tank from here on out. I may try a different method like Red Sea's NO3PO4X system or even vodka with selective additives, but success begets success, so zeolite is probably what I'd recommend to others. others until I can replicate the same series of results with other programs. I also learned that not having a controller on this tank from day one was not only a costly mistake because we bought so many items that are now useless, but also a choice that almost completely devastated the tank in week 50. For a video series like this, we felt like it made sense to add it later, but I'll never make that mistake again. I also haven't been a big proponent of manifolds in the past just because of the sheer volumes of calls we get on people who can't get them to balance properly, particularly the effects of opening and closing one valve has in the bean animal overflow system. I guess I've never had a big issue with them personally, and this tank is just another example of that, so I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that manifolds are a good idea for many plumbing installations with a single pump feeding everything. So outside of that, planning is everything, and our sump design is a good example of where we deviated from that a bit. The biggest reason that we run a fuge here is just because our sump has a spot for one, so why not? We also plumbed the system and bought a UV, and that's just a bad idea for carbon dosing in Zeo, so we turned that off as well. We're also not using the filter sock chamber as designed. At this point, you'll never see me set up a single tank without a roller mat again. Filter socks are just dead to me. The roller mat is every filter sock user's dream come true. Filter socks that change themselves. Last bit is listen to the people who have come before you, and if you choose to ignore their successes or failures, have a well thought out plan which will help you avoid their mistakes. I promised an update on the Elegance Corals, both of which were awesome and anyone would want. Also, both of which are now dead. Now, I didn't order these, they just came with the other livestock, but if I did, it would have been really wise to research before they got here the best methods where people are having the most successes, and I certainly wouldn't have added them to a brand new tank again. Similar to that, over the years, I've done a lot of research on the twin spot gobies, know a tremendous amount of failures, and listened to the successes. Hand feeding them the mix of Hikari cyclopods and PE calanus has absolutely worked, and then I'm committed to doing this forever. I will say this approach almost worked for me in the past, however, all the added nutrients were a problem for the tank, so I quit, and it didn't turn out well. So my advice is learn from the rest of us and really think about the requirements for hard to keep or maintain livestock. So what's in the future for the 160? Well, I plan on giving updates every month or two, and certainly when we make changes so everyone can see how it evolves, challenges we run into, and successes. Outside of that, RT is going to keep doing those 52 FAQs and creating a wealth of facts for all of you, so keep asking those questions. We're also going to explore something brand new, which I'm not quite ready to share with you yet, but if we can pull it off, you'll see the beginnings in just a few weeks. Just a heads up for everyone, RT and I will be wandering around MACNA this week, so feel free to stop us, can ask us a question or just say hi. Dave and Greg will also be filming the speakers again this year, so shortly after we'll release those. These are a level of depth on some topics you won't see anywhere else, and one of the few times the industry authorities get together and share all of what they've learned over the decades with you. We're going to leave you with a video montage of where the BRS160 has been and how it's doing now. If you like the series and want to see more like it, it's more valuable than ever to give this episode a thumbs up and subscribe so I can justify the ridiculous expense and time to produce these to our CEO, who's also our chief penny pincher. And for our week 52 poll, I'm asking all of you, what was your favorite episode? I picked out a few that I thought turned out particularly well.